Misinformation. We've heard it our whole lives. Policeman kills a person, usually a person of color. Then it comes out that that person was actually doing nothing wrong. The police department for whichever city holds a press conference to apologize, and then regular citizens start asking, how did we let this happen? Then the news pundits come out and they say the words that seem to calm everything down every time.
Well, it's not most cops. It's just a few bad apples. It's just a few bad apples. Bad apple. That's a lovely name for murderer.
I've been hearing this argument on the news for literally my entire life, and I bet you have too. Since I was old enough to understand what the news was, I've been hearing talking heads use this phrase to explain what's going on when the people who should be protecting us end up hurting us.
You have bad apples.
But like most people of privilege, I've never actually taken the time to research whether or not the bad apples claim is actually true. But yippity-dee, that's exactly what I've finally done for this video.
Don't try it.
The first thing we gotta do is break down and define the bad apples argument, and then we have to figure out if it actually holds water. So what do people mean when they say it's only a few bad apples? Well, the point of this argument is to say that the institutions of policing are not bad, it's just some individuals. The bad apples phrasing is used to boil down this argument to make it catchier and easier to repeat to other people.
Phrasing. Shut up!
But boiled down or not, does this argument actually hold water? To answer this question, I'm going to investigate whether or not the bad apple belief is true using the power of basic logic and publicly available information. Okay, and to start, here is the argument we're questioning. Individual cops can be bad, but the justice system and the police are not bad. We want to see if this claim is true, so we have to look at whether or not bad cops are treated the same as bad citizens who commit roughly the same crimes. So to look into whether or not this equality or inequality exists, we need to investigate
Administrative punishment.
if the way we police works and serves justice equally, then that means that bad individuals in police departments should be treated the same as bad individuals who are just private citizens. Okay, that's great, but how do we judge if that's true or not? Well, we have to look at examples of when a bad apple cop has acted unjustly. Specifically, we're going to look at deaths and injuries caused by police officers. If the justice system treats wrongful deaths perpetrated by police fairly, then their crimes should result in roughly the same punishment that would be handed down to any other citizen.
What are you going to do about it?
I'm going to compare examples and see if the way the government punishes police officers matches with how citizens were punished for equivalent crimes. To make these comparisons, I'm going to look at 5 cases of crimes committed by police officers and 5 cases of crimes committed by everyday citizens. For the police officers, I'm only going to look at cases where they were filmed committing the crime. The reason I'm only looking at cases where officers were filmed or recorded is because that's the only real way I can guarantee that they were actually using force unnecessarily. Or in other words, illegally. And you may ask, how can I be the judge of whether or not force is being used appropriately in footage? Well, I think it's obvious, and honestly, so does the Supreme Court. If you shoot someone who is not about to attack you, it's unnecessary. And for the private citizen comparison, I'm going to look at 5 cases where private citizens also killed or injured someone. This is to see if the way Americans were punished matches up with the way their police were punished. Since we're specifically comparing punishments, I don't need footage of the crimes committed by private citizens because they are already being punished, whether or not there's footage. And before you get all up on my back, I know that these are small sample sizes. That's not due to a lack of examples, that's just because this is a YouTube video and not a feature-length film.
Okay, let me get off of that thing. Oh, thank you so much.
And one last note before we jump in, out of respect for the dead, I am not actually going to show any footage of anyone dying. I will include some of the footage, but the actual moment of anyone's demise is not going to be in there. But I want you to be able to fact check me, so I will be linking to the full footage with iCards, and I'll have links in the description too. Okay, now you know why I'm doing this the way I'm doing this. Let's go. The first 2 cases we're going to look at are from 2013 and 2015. First, I'm going to walk through the police crime and then the civilian crime. You might have heard of this first case, the police killing of Walter Scott. Mr. Scott was a black American male driving through North Charleston in South Carolina. He had a broken taillight and a police officer, Officer Slager, pulled him over. According to the police report and footage captured by a nearby civilian, Mr. Scott ran away for unclear reasons. And here is where the police report starts differing wildly from the footage. And I'll trust video video evidence over a person's memory any day of the week. In the police report, Officer Slager claims that Scott stole his taser, but the video tells a different story. Mr. Scott is seen running away from Slager, and after he makes it about 20 feet, Slager shoots him 8 times. Scott falls to the ground after the 8th shot. After this, Officer Slager walks over to Mr. Scott and slyly drops something next to him on the ground. But even without planting this evidence, Slager has already acted illegally. The Supreme Court has ruled that it is only okay for an officer to shoot a fleeing suspect if that suspect poses a threat of death or serious physical injury to the police or other people. There is no sign in the video that Mr. Scott poses a serious threat to the police or anyone while he's running away. So it's safe to say that Officer Slager acted illegally when he killed Walter Scott. But then he also planted evidence. I will not be going this far in depth with each individual case that I'm going to cover. That's why I'm linking to the videos, so you can confirm that what I'm telling you is true. But I did want to walk through this first one just to demonstrate that this is not made up. Okay, back to it. How did this case end? Officer Slager was convicted of murder and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. I believe he is still appealing to get released before the end of his 20 years. But in the meantime, he is in Colorado serving his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution Englewood. This is considered by Forbes magazine as one of the best places to go to prison. Inmates are free to play pool, ping pong, foosball, and they even get a stunning view of the Rocky Mountains from the prison yard. Now we'll compare this example with a 2013 example of a civilian murder case. The case in question involves Bashun Christopher Phillips, who at the age of 20 allegedly killed his childhood friend Sharon Mason by shooting him through a bedroom window. This is a weird one because investigators could not find any definitive proof that Phillips shot Mason, but there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that pointed to Phillips as the most probable suspect. At the end of his trial, Phillips was found guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 20 years. Having researched both cases, I do think both Officer Slager and Phillips are probably guilty of murder. However, the one who is a police officer was sentenced to 20 years at a swanky jail. And he was filmed killing someone. On the other hand, Phillips, a civilian, was sentenced to life in prison on the basis of circumstantial evidence. That means there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime, footage or otherwise. Now this is only our first example, but this does not feel like equal punishment for equal crime to me. And I know the facts of these cases are very different, but they make a good comparison in terms of the inequity of available evidence and resultant punishment. In the police case, Officer Slager was literally filmed committing a crime, and he is going to jail for 20 years. But in the civilian case, there is no hard evidence, and he goes to prison forever. But that's only one example, so let's move on to the next one. Our next two cases are from 2019 and 2016. In 2019, Eric Friedrichsen, a civilian teenager, shot and killed Vincent Arellano in Grand Island, Nebraska. Despite only being 16, Eric Friedrichsen was tried as an adult and found guilty of second-degree murder. Because this case is so recent, the sentencing is actually still to come. It's scheduled for July 31st of this year, but it hasn't happened at the time I'm recording this. Despite the sentencing not taking place yet, the judge has already said that he is considering a joint recommendation of 40 to 45 years. This means Eric would be released from prison in his 50s or 60s.
Ew, our tax dollars hard at work. Well, not mine, obviously, but...
What's that?
Damn it.
And for our police crime example, I'm going to point to the 2016 shooting of Philando Castile in Minnesota. Mr. Castile was pulled over for a broken taillight. When the police officer came to his window, Castile explained that he had a gun in his car, but he also had a license to carry. He then told the police officer that he was going to reach into his pocket to get his driver's license. The moment this happened, the officer shot Castile in the torso. Using her phone, Diamond Reynolds, who is Castile's girlfriend and was in the car, immediately started live streaming to Facebook. The video begins with Reynolds explaining the information that I just gave you, and you can see and hear the officer freaking out through the car window.
I will, sir. No worries. I will. He just shot his arm off. We got pulled over on Larpener.
I told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his hand out of it.
You told him to get his ID, sir, and his driver's license.
This policeman's name is Officer Yanez, and he was acquitted of all charges in 2017. So looking at these two cases of death by firearm, we again have unequal justice. A teenager is going to prison, probably for most of his life, and he's not even old enough to vote. On the other side, we have a jumpy officer wrongfully killing a civilian, and he gets to walk free.
There's no justice in the world, not unless we make it.
Our next examples are from 2016 and 2018. We're going to look at the 2016 case first, which involves the officer shooting of therapist Charlie Kinsey. Kinsey was shot in the leg by Officer Jonathan Aleda while trying to protect his autistic client.
Kinsey even tries to calm the young man with autism. At some point, one of the officers shoots Kinsey, but he survives.
Aleda first had a trial in 2017, but it was declared a mistrial. But then in 2019, a jury acquitted Aleda of manslaughter, but found him guilty of negligence. Instead of prison time, Aleda was put on probation, had to do community service, and had to write a 2,500-word essay. You heard that right. The lucky part about all this is that, unlike my other examples, no one died.
Wow.
Because this 2016 case with Kinsey doesn't involve murder, I wanted to find something kind of equivalent on the civilian side. So sadly, my civilian example still involves death, and even sadder, it involves the death of a dog. I'm not gonna get into the specifics here. No one likes to think about bad things happening to pets. But TLDR, Calloway was caught abusing his dog and he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. It's heinous to abuse an animal, but I do want to strike up this comparison that for abusing a pet, someone went to prison for 12 years, and then for shooting at an autistic guy, no prison time was given. And I'd also like to point out that cops shoot a lot of dogs, and none of those police go to prison for it. In 2018, the Federal Department of Justice called police shooting family dogs an epidemic in this country. But anyway, the point is that Officer Aleda shot at a person and served no time for it, and Calloway did abuse his dog, and his dog did eventually die, and he served 12 years for that. And cops shoot dogs all the time, and they serve no years for it. So whether you're shooting at an autistic kid or a dog, if you're a police officer, it seems you're in the clear.
You betray the law! No! You betray the law! No!
Our next examples are both from 2018. The first involves the murder of Tony Green by Officer Presley in Georgia. Body cam footage shows that Presley killed Mr. Green after he ran from the police.
Presley chases Tony Green. Presley catches up to him. Presley uses his taser for 10 seconds. It stops. Seconds later, gunshots are heard from Presley's gun.
Presley has stated many times that Mr. Green was seeking to attack or turn on him, but the footage doesn't show any sign of this.
I got tased by my old taser. I had him behind his neck, and then he rolled me over and he was on top of me.
And Green was unarmed, meaning he served no real threat to the officer. Presley was unfortunately cleared of the murder, but found guilty of violating his oath of office. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Our civilian crime example from the same year took place in Kentucky. Edgar Villacastaneda threatened to murder a federal prosecutor, and he solicited someone to carry out that killing. At the end of the day, no murder actually happened. But just for making this threat, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. So you have a civilian who was sentenced to 30 years in prison for intending to kill someone, and you have a police officer who is sentenced to 1 year in prison for breaking his oath, which honestly is just a nice way of saying actually killing someone. And now for number 5. It's hard to sound enthusiastic when we're talking about something so dark. In this last example, I'm going to look at a 2009 police killing and a 1996 civilian murder. In 2009, Cesar Cruz was pulled over in Anaheim for a broken taillight. Sound familiar yet? Cruz pulled into a Walmart parking lot to get off the road for the officer, and then suddenly police cars surrounded him. This is because someone called in a false tip about him carrying weapons and drugs. And when the police cars surrounded Cruz, he accidentally backed into one of their vehicles. This makes sense. He was getting ambushed for no reason as far as he knew, so he understandably freaked out and probably hit the wrong gear. You know how this goes by now, not even from this video, just from living in this country. The police jumped out of their cruisers, they all pointed their weapons at him, and they shouted at him to get out of the car. Cruz obeyed, but when he opened his door, the police shot him 15 times before his feet could even hit the pavement, and he was totally unarmed. No police officer was charged in any way with this wrongful death. You may notice I did not use footage for this example, and that's because I didn't find any. However, this case has some excellent reporting done on it, and everything I've just said is verifiable if you want to look it up. By comparison, we have Kenneth Earl in Georgia, who went on a crime spree in 1996. The spree involved several burglaries, an attempted murder, and it ended with the murder of his ex-girlfriend. There is little dispute regarding whether or not he's guilty, and his execution date was set in 2016. Earl went on a crime spree, and he killed someone, and he was executed for it. Then we have a whole gang of police officers who shot an innocent man to death in a Walmart parking lot. None of them have had to pay any debt to society for that murder.
And I hate everything.
Okay, let's wrap this up. The Bad Apple's argument claims that the justice system is not bad, but some individual cops are. If that's true, then the justice system would punish criminal cops and criminal civilians equally. But as the examples I just showed you prove, that's not the case. When a civilian murders someone, they go to prison for a long time. But as we've seen, when a police officer murders someone, they get a shorter sentence or they may not get any punishment at all. So does the Bad Apple's argument actually make sense when you do the research? The answer is no. It does not. Our justice system punishes civilians, but cops get off easy. If you're a student of history, you know this is not new at all. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to fix it.
Try it. Some jobs can't have bad apples. Okay? Some jobs, everybody gotta be good. Like pilots. American Airlines can't be like, you know, most of our pilots like to land. We just got a few bad apples that like to crash in the mountains.
If all of this is news to you and you want more info, or hell, if you don't trust me and you want more info, I have something for you. Understandably, you may want to look at better research than I provided in this video, and if that's the case, there is a great 713-page paper in the Hastings Law Journal all about this subject. It reviews several police brutality cases where police were given preferential treatment by the courts. If you want to check that out, I have a link in the description.
Okay.
And that's the info about that.